Hey, welcome everyone to the South Coast Alliance webinar. We know this is a very difficult day around the country for many people, but we wanted to continue with what we're doing here in order to bring the Word of God and uplift our audience, knowing that there is going to be a better day. And to that, and we want to honor what's happening around the country. In a little while, I get to be part of a demonstration downtown with our mayor and our pastor, and to honor George Floyd's memory. So with that, I want to honor the blackout and with a moment of prayer and silence. If we could just take a moment, please. Thank you. All right, so with that, I'd like to welcome everybody and introduce our panelists. They are a formidable group of men. And before anybody says, why aren't there any women or others of color in this scenario? It's because I plan to do a series of these webinars, and I want to do one with women in a couple of weeks and include the minority voices as well. So right now we're talking to this incredible group of men who have had so much experience in filmmaking. And if I can take a moment, I'll introduce them one by one, and then we will introduce their topics, and they'll go and they'll share their experiences with us. Let me introduce Ryan O'Quinn. Ryan, raise your hand over there. He is an American film and television actor and producer. He is the president of Damascus Road Productions, a Los Angeles-based film and television production company specializing in family content. He started a production recently called Resolve. It's the story of a World War II hero, Clay O'Connor, set in the Japanese-occupied Philippines. Next, we have Simon Swart. He has diverse experience in all areas of film production and distribution. Because he's been in the business for 30 plus years, leading us. He's been a studio executive at Warner Brothers, Walt Disney, and 20th Century Fox most recently. He now heads up Antiba Pictures here in the United States. It's a South African-based company, and he has worked on films as that you may know, like I Can Only Imagine, and among others, and Six Below. And his most current film is Redeeming Love, which is slated to come out in 2021. And he just wrapped that film project in South Africa right before the COVID hit. So he's going to share with us some interesting perspectives. Ralph Winter. Hi, Ralph. He is an American film producer. He's produced such blockbusters as X-Men, Fantastic Four, Star Trek series, Planet of the Apes, and most recently Adrift. He is currently working on a project in Asia, and in the middle of the COVID, he had to come home and stop filming there. So he's going to share with us those challenges that he's had. His films have grossed collectively over $2 billion US. That's an incredible array of movies that he's been involved in. Ted Farnsworth is next. He's a financier, entrepreneur, former chairman of MoviePass and founder of MoviePass Films. He's the executive producer on Access Sally, 10 Minutes Gone, Gotti, Vigilante, Monsters and Men, and a host of others. In 2019, he formed Fortress Entertainment Group, and Fortress has recently announced a 3-picture deal with Damascus Road Productions for worldwide distribution. It's focusing on World War II and Holocaust films. Next is our friend Joe Battaglia. He's a broadcaster and author and the president of Renaissance Communications, who recently partnered with Salem Media to bring new distribution opportunities to indie filmmakers. He's also the executive producer and general manager of Keep the Faith, a faith-based music radio program um, with an audience of more than 2 million listeners. Joe recently promoted faith movies like Soul Surfer, Heaven is for Real, I Can Only Imagine, and the recently released I Still Believe. So then we have a wonderful gentleman out of California, Michael Van Dyke. He comes to us from the TV side. He's been in Hollywood for 28 years. He got his start as a literary agent, and he's been involved in programs like Dexter, High School Musical, Signed, Sealed, and Delivered with Hallmark, the Baxter series with Lightworkers, and recently with Kirk Franklin on Sunday Best. The company develops brands and broad mainstream appeal for streaming platforms. So he's going to tell us a little bit about the challenges of packaging or streaming platforms and what he's encountering these days with the new paradigm. Ryan, take it away. And Ryan, tell us how it's been to mount a production in the midst of COVID. What are the challenges that you've encountered?
Well, thanks, Jacqueline. Let me just quickly say thanks to you and to SCA and just echo your sentiments from the top. I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues here when I say that we are well aware that today across the entertainment industry and across the country is Blackout Tuesday, and we acknowledge that. We stand for everything that movement stands for, and we decided collectively to move forward together to continue this seminar, but just wanted to make note of the fact that we acknowledge that, and we're well aware of what's happening outside of our little computer screens right now, and we're going to continue praying for that. And you're exactly right, Jacqueline. Just to dive in, we're in the midst of pre-production right now. In fact, Ted, who's right below me on my screen, and I are in the midst of pre-production at the moment on a project. And the interesting piece that you're going to learn over the next hour is that several of the folks on this Zoom are in various stages of production rather. We were in pre-production. Simon just finished a movie. Ralph was in the midst of production. So you're going to get a good smattering of what it's like handling COVID in the midst of all this. But as we're gearing up for pre-production here, right now, all of us are on the precipice of trying to figure out exactly what is happening and what that looks like. And as a matter of fact, that's my topic that I'm tasked with, is what will it look like when we actually go into production? And forgive me as I look to my right on my right, your left on my screen here, because I literally 8 minutes before they pressed start on this recording, a 22-page document was handed down from the governor of California, and it was signed off on by the AMPTP and all of the unions. So this is literally hot off the press. It's one of those moments where a news anchor says this just in. That's literally what's happening right now. So I encourage, as soon as we're off of this call, I encourage everyone to go to deadline.com or variety.com and attempt to digest what has just been handed down. So I will attempt to regurgitate that momentarily, but I'll tell you quickly that the good news is,
Ryan, I'm sorry to interrupt. If you could share that with us, we'll post it on the South Coast Alliance website. So
I sure will. Yeah,
great.
I'll put that in the chat as well when I finish. But the good news is, Jacqueline, the entire industry at this moment is galvanized and is working hard to find a solution for reopening. That is the good news. As I mentioned, the California governor, along with the New York governor, primarily because those are the two states where the industry, is focused in shooting mostly, have both said and announced as a couple of weeks ago that they're committed to reopening Hollywood. I use that term in quotes, meaning the entertainment industry. The next steps that they spoke about was working with the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. That's an organization that was tasked with trying to figure this out. So one of the things that the governor of California did was to bring in a task force, which included John Huertas, who represented the actors, Ava DuVernay, who represented directors and producers, Ted Sarandos of Netflix, who represented producers and distributors, and try to wrap our heads around what this looks like in the midst of literally a global pandemic. Some of the things that they did were speak with and talk to studio executives, epidemiologists, medical professionals, health officials. And I think one of the outcomes that we're going to see is that smaller independent productions, and I say smaller, meaning, sub $25 million budget. This day and age, that's kind of a low budget and oftentimes indie picture, but smaller, lower budget pictures are going to be able to go back to work first. The higher, the 200 and 300 person crews is probably going to take a little bit more time. I think that's the consensus. Speaking of consensus, one of the big questions that people are asking is, what is this going to mean money-wise? How is this going to work? What's this going to mean to our budget? Oftentimes, independent projects, we build about 10% contingency into our budgets just to allow for exactly what it sounds like, some kind of contingency. But the consensus is we need to allow more than that. We need to allow probably that 10% as well as another 20% on top of our expected budgets for a number of things, including medical personnel, insurance. One of the things you can be sure of is that shorter work days is going to end up equating to a longer shoot. We're accustomed to 12, 13-hour work days on a film set, and they're talking now about shortening that to 10 hours. Inevitably, a 10-hour workday, you have to make up for it somewhere. As we build out our day out of days and build out our budgets, particularly where we are right now in pre-production, all of those things start to matter. So you're going to have to, as my grandmother used to say, you're going to have to cut the top of the blanket off and sew it onto the bottom of the bed sheet, right? We're going to have to make that up somewhere. Speaking of what you can expect, when we do actually get to go back to work and we physically are able to walk onto a set in the coming months, some of the things that you can expect, and again, this is all fairly fresh, literally less than an hour old since it left the governor's desk, but testing, for sure. They're talking about every member of the cast and crew is to be tested. And by the way, this has been signed off on by the AMPTP, SAG-AFTRA, DGA, and the MPA have all signed off on this. Testing, temperature checks when you get to set, possibly periodic temperature checks throughout the day. Staggered meal times. This is going to be new for us, especially as we're building out pre-production right now and production is going forward. One of the thoughts is to have a staggered meal time. Typically 6 hours into a workday, everybody breaks, everybody goes to the honey wagon, everybody gathers around the craft services table. Let me pause there for a second to say that it's highly likely we'll never see the craft services table again. That's probably gone away, and that would only make sense in the midst of a global pandemic, right? None of us hovering around a trough of food and sticking our hands in the M&Ms where somebody else was. So that's not going to happen anymore. I would imagine there will be some modified version of that, pre-packaged snacks and things like that. Some of the studios are already starting to partner with Gate Gourmet. If you're familiar with that company, Gate Gourmet is one of the airline preferred vendors that make individually wrapped meals. So it's quite probable that there will be 2 to 3 staggered meal times and even staggered call times. So you'll be called to set 6 hours or so after that. You'll be dismissed for lunch, and there'll probably be a couple of those. Think high school lunch period. There may be 1, 2, or 3 lunch periods during the day. Individually wrapped meals, liability waivers are a big deal, of course. Everybody is trying to wrap their heads around this one. Every member of the cast and crew will have to sign a liability waiver in some fashion. They're talking about what it looks like for actors, and again, this is all fresh, but they're saying that actors most likely will not wear PPE. That only makes sense, that actors will not have to, but at some point, whether it is at the beginning of a production coming up or at some point during production, a director is going to say to a pair of actors, you need to walk over there and stand next to that person, or you need to go kiss that person. Now, the ultimate question is, whose liability is that? What does that look like? So liability waivers are a must. That's going to be in full effect for sure. Smaller crews. I saw a message from one director who said that he cut his crew by 40%. It was a production that's taking place overseas right now. Smaller crews, face masks, closed sets. Typically you'll tell your second or your second when you have a visitor coming to set. That's going to go away at least for a period. So no visitors on set. Around the world, not just in this country, but around the world, people are doing things a little differently. And just to highlight a couple of those, in the Czech Republic right now, you have to have a negative COVID-19 test before you're cleared to work. all cast and crew members. They have to have another test 72 hours later. In the country of France, 50 people maximum are allowed on a film or television set. Right now in Poland, they're doing mandatory 14-day pre-production quarantines. So it's quite possible we'll see something like that in this country as well. A little trickier, of course. I heard of one production recently that is moving to Arizona, and they mandated that all of their entire cast and crew actually took over one hotel. And as they wait for the green light from the unions, they're just standing by, and everybody is
That makes sense.
agreeing to self-quarantine. You've probably seen the trades in the last couple of, the last week or so. Some productions are going back in Georgia. The Tyler Perry Studios, he self-describes it as a military-like procedure, and their studio, of course, is on, their current backlot is on an old military set. So I think it would only make sense that they have military-like procedures. But just to walk through some of that a little bit as to what they're doing and what we might see coming up in the future. As you pull up to the set, pull up to the lot rather, your car is valeted. Somebody takes that car and goes and parks it, and they are committed to cleaning and sanitizing the inside of that car. Cast and crew members walk inside the studio, and they put their belongings that they brought to set on a conveyor belt. Think airport TSA security type things, and it's screened and sanitized, and then they go to their respective rooms. They will be tested, and from there, about 4 hours later, they will have a meal time with the entire group. Somebody mentioned that they had a 56,000 square foot soundstage, and people are just kind of relegated to certain parts of the soundstage. Nobody's getting within six to 10 feet of each other. And then eventually they start their workday. So, you know, things are going to look different. I think the days of showing up to set and high-fiving various members of the departments, you know, and then getting to work are over. It's quite probable that we'll all be relegated to our own individual areas. I heard of one film production overseas that is looking at various things, including either color-coded lanyards or color-coded armbands. For example, the camera department was all wearing blue armbands. The makeup department were wearing red armbands. So each of the departments on the film set were, you know, were kind of sticking to themselves and relegated to staying amongst themselves and committing to that for the entire shoot. In places like Sweden, they're doing voluntary testing in the weeks leading up to production. So self-quarantining and kind of self-regulating that. In South Korea at the moment, you're immediately tested as soon as you come to set. In Iceland, cast and crew members have decided not to ride share. That's a typical thing, to ride share to set. We're all accustomed to, you know, sometimes meeting.
So basically, we're going to take more preventative measures to keep our sets safe and pretty much isolated from everybody else. Because once you establish that the herd, that the group is safe to be around, then the interaction with other people won't be allowed, basically, right. and then it'll contain any disease that might be entering or coming from other areas. So that's pretty good. That's sort of daunting, but on the other hand, it makes for a very tight-knit group of people. When you leave, you've kind of made new friends and family, which is kind of the way it is anyway. But that intensity is going to be really interesting to administer.
Yeah, you know, we all sort of half jokingly compare making a film to being in a foxhole, right? You know, we're all in it together, and arguably now more than ever, I think once we finish a film, we will have said we've been through it.
Exactly. Well, thank you for those insights. I know it's going to be very valuable to filmmakers going forward.
One more
next,
quick. Oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to add just the two big takeaways I would say, Jacqueline, in addition to what I'll post just in a little bit and let you post on the South Coast Alliance website, is certainly check with state, regional, and municipality protocols. That's biggies. You know, everybody kind of has their own idea in terms of geography about how they're doing it, when they're rolling things out, and when the actual green light comes. And then, of course, make sure to check with your unions to make sure you're in compliance with your own union.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. So next up, we have Simon. Simon, you just wrapped up in South Africa and barely made it out of the country before the COVID clamped down on everything. Tell us about your experience and what you anticipate going forward.
Thanks, Jacqueline, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Our company is basically set up to provide turnkey solutions. We're a financier and a producer. So we talk about the investment side of the business, as well as the production side of the business, as well as the distribution side of the business. And we tend to look for content that is kind of packaged or scripts that are ready to go. We're looking for content where the budget's right, it has the ability to play globally, but most importantly, it's got to work in the US market because that tends to provide the widest platform globally. And we're focused on content that's made with A-listers, has a clearly defined audience, and has multiple distribution options in order to reach that audience. And I want to set it up that way because if you look at all the challenges facing the industry right now, they all fall in, the main concerns fall into those major buckets, right? We've always been pre-COVID, we were very focused on managing distribution because you find a lot of producers can make an amazing movie and deliver an amazing movie on budget. And then when it comes to distribution, the project either gets hijacked or goes sideways. So when we get involved in a project, we stay very active with it. We tend to be first money in most cases, sometimes second money, but we get directly involved. We're in a great position right now just through good fortune, I guess. We have one movie in the can called I Am All Girls that deals with human trafficking, directed by Donovan Marsh. It's a fresh and gritty look at this, inspired by movies like Drive and Sicario. And that's going to be a straight sort of streaming play for us, I believe. And we just wrapped Redeeming Love in South Africa, where we were using Cape Town and we recreated 1800s Boston and Northern California. And we were on multiple locations over, a fairly lengthy shoot. And I'll unpack that a little bit, but we got very lucky there with the whole COVID of it. Because, as this whole thing was coming down, we were watching it very closely around the world. We started principal photography the first week in February, and we wrapped on March 15th. And the very next day, within 24 hours, they'd shut the industry down. So it's a pretty nerve-wracking experience shooting this major film down there. And the climactic scene of the movie was shot on the last day. And so I was sort of, it was a nail biter going, okay, it's like we get shut down and we can't get that closing scene. We're in trouble. But I'll unpack that a little bit for you. I mean, in the past, in the world before coronavirus, there was all kinds of chaos in the industry anyway. If you look at the disruption and the opportunities presented for independent film and the challenges facing the studios, the disruption of the streamers, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Apple, etc., all kind of getting into the game. It was actually pre-coronavirus, it was a great time to be creating content, but you had to be very aware of the rules, how you package. You got to know the budget, you've got to have a view to your distribution, you've got to know your audience. This is not a world and if you build it, they will come, right? You've got to have thought through all of those things, and this is pre-corona, it changes, right? And despite all the disruption and all the talk of the demise of the theatrical experience, etc., the one fact that stands in direct contrast to all those dire stories of the pressure in the theatrical business is that your domestic box office is still the #1 predictor of your overall profitability around the world. And that's a little paradoxical, right? Your foreign deals change value based on your US screen counts, your stars, the genre, and most of your downstream revenue is set by domestic box office. These massive budget movies can't be made without a robust theatrical marketplace. And this was the tension before COVID. All the debates about windows, revenue splits, screen counts, which everybody on this call should be familiar with, right? These are conversations that have been active and every independent filmmaker and non-independent filmmaker needs to be aware of it. The movie has to be good enough to justify the P&A. And everyone goes, oh, if I just get P&A and I just get distribution, I'm made in the shade. And that is simply not the case. I've always said it's very important when you raise your production money is to raise P&A at the same time. Yes, it is harder, but try and get your lead investors to back up their own production so that you don't get hijacked and you can control your future. Right? That's something I've been very adamant about, and it is hard to do. Don't get me wrong, I have no illusions about how difficult it is to do that. But I think controlling your strategy about how you get to your audience, having a voice at the table is really important. You know, in my former life, in my studio job where I marketed and released tons of programming from Star Wars and Avatar to The Simpsons, Family Guy, X-Files, and indie classics like Juno, Napoleon Dynamite, Black Swan, I saw the studios gradually moving away from these mid-level movies and the smaller movies because they were focused on the next big franchises, and they were basically creating a vacuum in the space that was held by smaller movies, many of which, the majority of which, all made money. The risk profile of the smaller movies are very different to the risk profile of the big movies. And you know, even vanity projects started falling by the wayside. You could do a Tom Hanks or a Will Smith movie and you'd know that it would do a certain box office. Well, if the movie wasn't good enough or it was targeted wrong, that was not the case, right? With social media being as it is, it was over. You couldn't spend your way out of a bad movie anymore. So when I left the studio, I intently focused on projects in the 15 million and under range. Stories that unite and inspire humanity while entertaining them. Because at that budget range, you can get an A-list cast, you can get an A-list director, you can actually make something that looks fantastic with technology the way it is now. No, you might not be able to do the Avengers. I can tell you categorically you can't. But at that budget range, if you package it right and you put it together right, you actually have the most distribution options. You're not committed to a theatrical release where you might get stuck behind a big P&A spend. You also have, you know, streaming as an option. You can look at premium video on demand. Just know that the higher your budget goes over that 15 million number, you gradually start losing distribution options as that number goes higher. The higher you go, when you start spending $100 million on a movie, you must have a theatrical release. And that often involves spending like another 50 million in marketing, 35 to 50. It's not unknown, but distribution was the key, right? If you could make it for a right price, you could make enough if you sold it to a streamer, if you got that golden ticket where they paid over your production price, right? Depending on what rights they option, but that would also take other options off the table. And like, make no mistake, before COVID, Netflix, Amazon, and Apple are all studios and they're all networks. The disruptors are now a key part of the establishment. And you realize how much potential these game changers actually have. If you look at the market capitalization of Google, Apple, Amazon, they dwarf even the largest studios by almost 10 times. Those are the guys you've got to watch, right? They are still the game changers, and you've got to pay attention to how they're buying content all the time. So let's get to the present. So on that backdrop of chaos, confusion, and opportunity for filmmakers, you come to the present. And in January, when we left for South Africa to shoot Redeeming Love, COVID-19 was a small story in the back of the news that was happening in Wuhan, China. And it didn't seem like it was going to be that big, but we were still watching it nonetheless. We were in production in South Africa doing the normal shooting days, long days, tough conditions, and monitoring it very closely. We started putting hand sanitizer. We started bringing masks onto set. If anyone got sick on set, they had to go get cleared before they could come back to set, right? So we started just doing those practical things and started getting really stressed out about if we're going to be able to get everybody home and get everyone shot out. It was a little hair-raising, but as I said before, we got very lucky. We wrapped within 24 hours of everything being shut down, and we were able to get everyone back home safe. And to my knowledge, we haven't had anyone who's come down with coronavirus on our crew. But again, you know, we're also in one of the places in the world where coronavirus was almost last to come. And since then, South Africa has enacted very strict restrictions and regulations on their entire population, as is happening here. And you know, I think that's one of the key things to remember about this COVID situation. What makes it unusual and unprecedented, it's not just the entertainment industry, it's every industry and it's every country, right? We're focused today on our little piece of the pie, as it were, and how it's going to affect us. But it's going to affect, obviously it's affecting everything. And there's some comfort in that, right? Is that we're all going through this together. All industries are going through this. And, you know, I still tend to be quite optimistic. Looking at what happened in 1917, 1918 after the Spanish flu, there was a massive rebound in people going out and, going out for live entertainment and films and things like that. And I know that was 100 years ago or more, but it's still a pretty good indicator of human nature.
We're slowly opening up here in Texas, and we haven't been as impacted as the coast as New York or California, or even Miami. So we see the resurgence. People are hungry to get back to their lives, and part of that is escaping their day-to-day activities by going into entertainment, by going to films, and that's why we play such an important role in all of this, because we provide that relief, we provide that uplift, we provide that hope through the stories that we tell. Thank you, Simon.
And I think what Ryan was saying about smaller movies going to be easier to get up and going in the near term than the larger movies, right? And you also got to watch distribution. If you've got a movie in the can right now, it's a good time to be selling. But if you've got a big movie, all the studios are holding their big studio productions, and they're all going to come in the fourth quarter or as soon as theaters open. It's going to be a pretty crowded marketplace when that reopens. And I would encourage everyone.
Sharp elbows, for sure.
Yeah, watch what happens with Unhinged. It's coming out on 6,000 screens on July 1st. They've announced it, and that's a very creative strategy. But I say, just look. You've got to look at and be aware of all these things. What I can tell you about everyone that's trying to predict the future of media and entertainment, the one thing I know for absolute certainty is that they will be wrong. Okay?
Guaranteed.
Don't worry. I've read all the headlines in my 30 years of the death of Hollywood, the demise of Hollywood, how the DVR was going to stop people watching live TV. People don't anticipate how technology comes together, but I can tell you it's still a great time to be a content creator and a content distributor. People want content. I think that there's going to be a push towards more hopeful, optimistic escape there, which I think is good for us. Just remember, it's still got to be good.
Well, that's why we're creatives, because we can work around these problems. So,
yeah. And just let me wrap up, Jacqueline, really quickly. There's three things you got to know, and they're principles regardless of COVID. Is know who your audience is, have a distribution plan, even though it changes, right? And remember, quality always rises to the top. Work with experienced people, work with people that have done it before, package it properly, because that's the best way to mitigate your risk, even through all this uncertainty.
Thank you, Simon. That was brilliant. Ralph, can we get you to tell us about how all the ways we were wrong in assessing what was going to happen in the middle of your production? And I mean, you were right there in Asia when all of this was breaking loose. It must have been terrifying.
One of the things that we do overseas, I've worked overseas mostly in the last 20 years. I've not worked in the US really in the past 20, is we have a unit manager that manages, locations, tables, parking, cones, all that kind of stuff. I think we're going to see a unit manager just for COVID-19, a safety supervisor, and a team that's cleaning up ahead, during, and after. That person's going to have to be certified and trained. Maybe that's in the 22 pages, Ryan, that you sent out. I don't know. But, testing is going to be is a huge issue. Now, my wife and I are going, she's a healthcare worker. We're going on Friday to Dodger Stadium to get tested and see what that's like. Most of them are not really reliable yet. We need reliable testing if we're going to do it. The DGA was calling for testing to happen before the workday. You can't expect to get any work done if you're going to try to test people the day of and get through that and get results. Even temperature checks we were doing in Tokyo are almost meaningless. But I think that reliability of testing, doing it ahead of time, being organized, and I think, as also Ryan said, we're probably looking at 10 to 20% added on to the cost of production. Someone's got to pay for that. If we're going to shoot 10-hour days, someone has to tell the director that. Not all directors want to do that. We were ahead of it a little bit in terms of we already had everything's packaged in Japan. We already had prepackaged craft service and things like that. But the biggest concern, and I think something that you don't hear talked about a lot, is really the actors. The actors have to be safe without protection. When are they going to be comfortable? When are their representatives going to allow that? And that's going to drive everything. If your actors aren't committed and feeling reliably safe on camera. You don't have a start date, you can't prep. We're supposed to go back to Tokyo in July for an August start. We'll see what Ansel Elgort and Ken Watanabe say and what the representatives say. We shot about 6 days. We still have about 12 days left. We expect those 12 days will expand to 15 or 16 days, just with all the protocols we have to go through. So it just gets more complicated around the world, and like in Japan, where everything has to happen with translations, and what a normal conversation is just going to take 2 or 3x what it normally would. And now we're going to impose SAG, DGA, AMPTP restrictions in a culture that is used to being close and being together. So there's another hurdle to sort of overcome on top of just prepping and doing what you're trying to do. So enormous obstacles yet to be worked out. Personally, I think we're a little optimistic, think it's going to go back to work this quickly. You got 2 actors in a room, you can be Tyler Perry, that's fine, you can do that. Tokyo Vice on the streets of Tokyo, one of the most difficult places to shoot in the world and most expensive. Another story entirely.
Would you consider bringing that stateside and doing it, say, in San Francisco or Seattle?
See, the architecture is completely different. They talked about Vancouver. How do you bring in all the thousands of extras? I did a movie, Crouching Tiger, a couple of years ago, the sequel, and we went to New Zealand because 30% of the population is Asian, and thought that would ease up how to have Chinese extras. Those people are working. They don't want to be an extra for $50 a day. They didn't care.
Yeah.
So, you know, we did a little bit of work in China. So you're not going to bring 1,000 or 2,000 Japanese extras to Vancouver to try to make that work. Those people are working and have careers, et cetera. So
some things can't be.
Really, yeah, it's really going to be interesting. Certainly we can solve things with visual effects. That just, you know, starts to add costs that no one wants to absorb. So maybe it's smaller pictures that will, you know, proliferate. But I do think as storytellers, the need for us in the culture is even more as prophets, as truth tellers, as storytellers that get at the emotional truth of what's happening in our culture and how we learn and how we get through the human journey. The need for content, the need for great storytelling, it puts us in a very terrifying and exciting position.
Well, thank you for those insights. I'm curious to see how what you were just saying will impact decision makers. What stories going forward will be green lighted? You know, will we go in the direction of escapism, or will we want to see stories of what happened in the COVID? I mean, the story of the Diamond Princess that you pointed out is incredible, and in the midst of all of that story is a thread of a storyline that involves their faith, how they relied on their faith, and how these 4 individuals that became friends before the COVID started adapted and held up for each other during the time when they were being quarantined. It's a fascinating story in and of itself, but you know, sometimes in the best of times we want shoot 'em ups and thrillers and things that take us to a scary place. When we're in scary times, we want things that uplift us and give us hope and provide an outlet for those fears. So it'll be interesting to see the scripts that percolate during this time.
Yeah.
My next guest is Ted Farnsworth. Ted, tell us about, you know, you were talking about you're the finance guy, and you've decided to venture into producing films, not just investing in them. What does that mean for you in these times, and what are you doing you're on the East Coast in New York, right? You're the rest of these guys are all on the West Coast.
Correct.
So how do you see things differently?
Well, you're right. That's where I am right now. I've actually had meetings over the last week with investors, actual live meetings. Everybody practicing social distancing. It's different to get back to really sitting across the table from the lawyers and everybody else drawing up different things. But I think, going back to Jacqueline, where you and I and several people on here have talked about even doing a webinar just on financing alone. There's so much to unpack there. But I will say the encouraging news is, even the challenges we're going through with COVID and things like that, the encouraging news is consumption is up, 300% at home. So there's plenty of room. It's wide open for independents to go in there and to, do whatever they can do to get out there and get their deals done. But going back to the investors always look at, as you see, I got CNBC on the back of me, which I watch, nonstop, that and Fox Business all day long. But the market is really the indicator for what's going to happen, I believe, of, investing. And the big misconception I see out there is when people say, the markets are down, it's going to be tough to raise money. It's actually the opposite, where if I could sit there and I can say, I'm going to make, 38% on Apple, why would I invest in a movie? If I'm going to make 200% on Tesla, why should I invest in a movie? So the downswing of a market is not always the worst thing. It's actually when small cap companies and companies that might be a little bit more risky, like a movie, because you just don't know, where it's actually better to raise the money and there is a better shot of doing it. I will say the best thing I can tell people to do is you got to make your investors feel comfortable, meaning that in uncertain times, investors are uncertain. When the market gets a little shaky, like what's going on today, the unrest over the last few days, the markets, they got to settle in. Once they settle in, and there's times when you walk away and you just take a break for a few days and let things settle in, and just let it calm down and let the world, move on. But I would say that the risk profile of, like what Simon was talking about earlier, if you have great content and if you can spend your money on that, the one thing that bothers me a little bit is, like, when we're talking about 20%, say 20% on a $10 million film, $2 million spent on just COVID. I mean, $2 million to add extra, stars on your program or whatever is a lot of money to the small independent film. But I think there's ways to protect your investor. And I always talk about deleveraging the risk, which is really using all the tax credits that are out there, being able to get your, do your minimum guarantees overseas if you can, or wherever it is that you can get it. And I think you can do that relatively, with 60, 70%, especially a lot of the states I think are going to come back out with more tax credits and things like that, just to drive the economies, because the economy with the unemployment, what's going on today, it's very telling. And, the other day, just being on with the SBA, with you there, just learning what's going on in the country of different opportunity zones that are created out there in different pockets around the country. And there's another 10 to 15% there from the SBA. And I think the independents really got to look at stuff like that of how to do it. But going to your regular investors, where they're going to own equity in the film, and they know it could be an annuity program down the road if they own a piece of the film, is still very appealing. And I'm finding it's still, Hollywood's Hollywood. It's never, that's never going to change. I agree with Simon. We can all predict everything and we're all clueless. We all say what we make plans and God laughs. So I think that the whole sector of raising money is wide open right now. I think content's wide open. Yeah, it's a little bit tougher maybe here and there, but not really. I think it's encouraging. And I also think theatrical release will come back. I do. I just think, we have short memories. And I think the one thing that Americans take for granted is we took for granted that we could go to the movie theater, and now all of a sudden after it starts to open up, and I'm talking months down the road, not in the next 30, 60 days, but I think it's going to come back. And I also think you're going to see nostalgia where drive-in movie theaters are going to make a comeback somewhat. You got your family in the car, you got Bluetooth technology, you got great systems in your cars now, even the lower end cars. I mean, and it's a whole different experience that, this generation's never experienced. And right now I know just watching some of the old drive-in theaters are sold out. I mean, of tickets coming up when they're going to open, like next month. So that's kind of interesting. So I think there's going to be a new twist, and I think Simon was right about where you got to have distribution planned out. your content in, you know, and I think everybody on here obviously knows that, but on the finance side, it's still there. It's still very, very active, and I think it's only going to pick up.
That's encouraging, because most independent filmmakers, that's the one thing that they are not set up to do. You know, most filmmakers are creatives, and number crunching and pursuing marketing opportunities and investors is a new learned skill. So as they go into this, knowing that there's a good climate for them, I think makes it maybe a little less scary than thinking, oh my gosh, you know, the money has all dried up. Now where do I go?
And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned over the years of, you know, 30, 35 years on Wall Street is that you learn is when you go for the certain budget that you're going for, don't skimp on the budget. It's better if you think you're going to need 7 million, ask for 10 million, because you don't want to go back to the well at 7 million and say, oh, by the way, I need another 3 million. That's where you're going to go sideways. So
Exactly.
Figure it out. Don't be afraid to ask for it. I always tell people it's easier to raise 10 million than it is to raise $1 million. And it's just, you know, and it's only because of it's the same amount of work, you know, for the investors.
Exactly.
And, you know, so it's, and when I say easier, nothing's easy. Don't get me wrong. But I think there is ways to deleverage the risk with all the credits and things out there that you can do to make the investors feel comfortable, especially like a surety bonds, making sure that, oh, wow, if they don't finish the movie, a bond company is going to come in and at least finish the movie, and look at it almost like a real estate asset where you're buying into an asset. A movie's no different. And that's how I look at it and how I explain to a lot of my investors. Don't always just try to pitch it as a movie deal. Try to find out what your investors are used to. If they're real estate investors, movie is the same way. It's an asset. It's an asset that gives back money. It's almost like the leasing program. Every month you're going to get your royalties or whatever it is, just like a rental property. And if you can put that in, if you can wrap that story around it and figure out how to do that, you know, it's.
And right now there's 2 bills on the House side that are being brought forth by a congresswoman out of New York, out of the Brooklyn area, that is to establish insurance credits for insurance companies so that they can provide underwriting for films, which I think is very valuable. And part of my mission next week is to find a co-sponsor on the Republican side to try to get those bills put forward, because I think it's going to be integral to movie making. Without insurance, you know, how can you make sure that the film is secure, right? So
Right, sure.
I'm excited about that.
Look, I think the silver lining I see in COVID is we're all in the same boat. That's the interesting part. Every production company, everybody's in the same boat, so we're all in it together. Like somebody said that earlier, and that's not such a bad thing. I think where people start sharing, even competitors or whatever, and really rally around each other and help each other out in different ways, like I know Hollywood does. So I think that's encouraging, and you know, in any way we can help people, little independents out there trying to figure out how to finance or whatever, we're always wide open and always willing to, you know, to help them out any way possible. So I think on the financing side, which I agree, Jacqueline, that's probably the most difficult thing when you talk to independents of what to get through. Like I said, when you do your webinar on that, I think it will be another one too. Just there's so much to unpack of things like that, of how to get financing, where to go, who to talk to, et cetera, instead of just going to mom and dad and your aunts and uncles and things like that.
Or maxing out your credit cards.
Or maxing out your credit cards, which are some of the best success stories, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Ted. All right, we're going to take questions at the end of this period, and we've got some really good ones in the pipeline. But right now we're going to talk to Joe Battaglia and ask him what's new on the Renaissance side with marketing and distribution. I know you've got some really innovative things that you're bringing forward with Salem Media to help filmmakers get their materials out and distributed through channels. So Joe, tell us about what you're doing.
Thanks, Jackie, and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm going to really focus a little bit on the independent filmmaker and give them some good news. You've heard from the heavyweights just before me. I'm kind of the lighter weight in this, I think.
No, you're not.
And so, you know, for 18 years, I've been involved in the promotion of all the faith-based movies that everybody has loved. It's been fun working on them, everything from The Passion to Miracles from Heaven and God's Not Dead and Heaven is for Real and War Room. And then most recently, I Can Only Imagine, Breakthrough, Overcomer, and I Still Believe before the virus, you know, put it into the streaming world after 1 week out there. So, and the marketing of all these movies have everything to do with the promotional side for one thing in common. It doesn't matter which one it has been. We've always created this marketing team around a movie that's comprised of various silos: radio, television, church, ministry preparation, social media, all these kinds of methods that we take months out, sometimes even a year out, to create an organic strategy. So it's all focused on one thing, right? Opening weekend box office. That's the important thing. And we spend millions of dollars doing that. Well, that works for a studio or a well-financed independent movie, but it leaves out a lot of the independent filmmakers, maybe many of them who are watching today, who have and pour all their energy into their love, their product, their baby, and they bring that out and they spend their energy and their income. The problem is they don't have adequate funds at the end of that to promote their movie, or they wind up getting a maybe a licensing deal, or they go straight to DVD. And so the question becomes, what happens with all that? You know, and it languishes, never to see the light of theatrical day. And so I'm here to help maybe provide an option for that. You know, now that streaming is a very viable option and we've seen how well that will do, there's still one major drawback. There's really no substantial way to promote the product on a sustained basis in that sense. How do you stand out from the crowd of movies that are out there that may be on a streaming service or on a subscription service? And so that's been the big question. Well, we may have an option for you now, and that's what we have done at Salem Media, who I've worked with on the broadcast side for, you know, my 40-year career in radio. And so they've come up with their video on demand platform, again, called salemnow.com. And basically, the goal is to allow first run exclusive movies on this platform. That could be entertainment, it could be family-friendly movies, it could be documentaries, and through an aggressive promotion over their 100+ radio stations and various web and social media platforms, we now have an option to help promote that. And so I've recently entered into this arrangement with them that I think affords an independent movie a wonderful opportunity that they've not had before. And again, it's a subscription. It's not a subscription model. It's a transactional model. And so with this platform that they've created, they really did it initially just to take their own product to the global world with their talk shows and their hosts. And they launched it with Dennis Prager's No Safe Spaces, and that's done remarkably well for the licensing and DVD sales over, well, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that has been a wonderful opportunity to engage their audiences. And so they've now opened it up to where we can take other limited releases for faith-based, conservative, politically conservative, family-friendly content. And so that's what we're going to be looking for. And the opportunity here is really to provide these movies a massive marketing machine with what Salem has with their audiences across all their platforms. And if we find content that fits the model and makes a lot of sense to us, we can then drive all those audiences to that one movie at a time. And so it's a really focused approach to helping these independent movies have a platform and focus on them one at a time and provide all that opportunity for them. So here's the deal that I think most people want to know about. How does that work, right? Well, really, if it's a first run exclusive movie, it becomes a 50-50 revenue share. It's really that simple. And so, you know, when we launched Safe Spaces, it did extremely well. And this week we're going to launch with Return to the Hiding Place. And so that is a wonderful independent movie that has never been theatrical. It's just have you had it maybe at a movie night?
No, I'd like to.
Yeah, well, you will. And so it is really a remarkable, and the Spencers who produced that did an amazing job. And so basically, what we're going to do is offer these movies the full Salem platform of opportunity and promotion. And so everything gets directed to the salemnow.com site. That particular URL will be in operation maybe this week. They've launched it. They've launched the Prager Safe Spaces on Watch Salem Media Now. And so we're just going to launch salemnow.com very soon. And so, again, the opportunity to provide an exclusive run with all the marketing that is behind them. This is going to be novel for a lot of people. Salem will commit to a significant marketing of the movie if it's first run and exclusive with them. And that could literally be hundreds of thousands of dollars of earned media value, driving their huge audience platform to these. And so it's a perfect option of distribution and marketing for filmmakers who have a product but have never been able to get theatrical funding, or even, you know, a one-night event, maybe as a Fathom event. So here's a way to get major exposure and promotion and generate revenue without having to come up with P&A. So that's a pretty novel way of doing that. And I think it's really the only opportunity I know of that is like this that will enable us to do that. I see you have a question.
So yes, so if I'm an audience member and I want to see some of these films, is it through the Salem Media platform? Would we register? How would we get a hold of these films that are now going to be in this pipeline?
Oh yeah, it's it'll be salemnow.com where they can watch it. Now there may be people who are interested in saying, well, I'm raising my hand, I want my movie to show on this platform, right? And so it seems pretty good to me because I've got this great movie that I've done. And they really didn't listen to what Simon said earlier, raising the P&A with the production money. And right. So, and you know, and we, you know, we've worked with so many wonderful filmmakers that you meet at many of our film festivals who have poured their heart and soul into creating their dream movie. And many of them are really good. And yet, where do they go if they can't get theatrical? And so that's where my heart is for those, excuse me, for those people. I think we have an option for you now. And this is a way for tens of thousands of people to see what you've created. And I would love to help people talk about that. And if, you know, they can certainly contact me. So it's really a good opportunity for that. Yeah.
Yeah, to me, I talk to so many filmmakers, and everybody has a script. Everybody has a movie that they want to make. But it's I think Ted said it earlier. You know, it's a business first and foremost. You got to get the funding for your widget. Once you get your widget made, you got to find an audience to buy that widget. And so many of the filmmakers, you know, do the first two, but forget who their audience is. Who are you making this for? It's great if you want to write this story, and it's great if you want to film it on your video, But if you want to make money on it, then you've got to find an audience. And with that in mind, you've got to create a script that that people will want to go and see. And so there's three parts to filmmaking. It's not just all the creative. There's a business side to it, and that's why it's called the Hollywood business, or the movie business.
Jack, if I could interject really quickly, if it's your first time as a screenwriter or a director, you are by default high risk. You're immediately high risk, right? So if you don't have writing credits, working on a writing team on TV, or have worked on big productions in various capacities, your risk is high to an investor.
Exactly. So with that, we're going to throw it to Michael. We've saved the best for last, but not least.
At least the best news for last. No, it's a pleasure just to be the only television packaging guy on the panel. And it's a pleasure to just, talk about and answer questions about this, this strange climate that we're in. The news I have is all good. The pipeline is wide open. Myself and my team have been working longer and harder given a global pandemic shutdown than we did pre-pandemic shutdown. We have 13 television projects, series, and documentaries set up. 90% of adaptive family content, which is the sweet spot of what we do. Within the last 2 weeks, we've had 3 cable and streaming Zoom pitches. Netflix, HBO Max, Lifetime, and 2 broadcast Zoom pitches as well. And normally, historically, the broadcast season doesn't start until June. So, with the new streaming networks and that are all popping up and that are extremely well financed, there's never been a more advantageous time to sell this content. And with the shutdown, everybody's at home. The streaming networks are all, in terms of viewership, on the rise, and they're buying. My other friends and colleagues on this panel talked more about the production aspect of it. The pipeline is open. All of us need to move from the pipeline into production. That's how we get paid. That's how, obviously, all the viewers wind up seeing the content. But having been on the television packaging side of the business for 28 years, I can encouragingly say that the pipeline is open and it's exciting. And just to mention a couple of things, the process, although the pipeline is open, the process, given the shutdown, has been frustrating. I mean, to quote I talk to agents constantly, managers and studio executives, but volume with inefficiency is a dangerous combination. I mean, we're working 8-10 hours a day to accomplish what we used to accomplish in 1 hour, with everybody accessible, everybody in their offices. Now everybody's calling everybody's cell phone. It takes weeks and weeks to get a hold of people. You have to send emails, make phone calls, now even text people, which I never used to do when everybody was in their office space. So the process is frustrating, and that's why it's more labor intensive. But the good news is the pipeline is open and people are buying. And the packaging process has always been, nothing about it is easy. Content is king, and that's formats, award-winning New York Times best-selling books, scripts. But equal to that in the television packaging world, it's all about the writer, producer, showrunner. I mean, ideas are a dime a dozen. And when you have a successful format, executives like to know that either a format's been successful in another country, or a book has, awards, and or the script is written by someone who's, knows what he's doing. That showrunner with the idea is what's key. And I've made it my point, having staffed for 25 years as an agent, to get to know the top A-list showrunners in Hollywood, and particularly more recently, those showrunners where their faith really matters. And I think, given everything that's going on in our world, and certainly locally here in LA in the last couple of days, it's never been more about the content that is all of our sweet spots, the redemptive family content. and it's an exciting time. But with that showrunner, and then with the content that is successful, the best thing that we do is we target what networks are appropriate, and then from there back up. I mean, a lot of these new streaming networks, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Peacock, they all want to be in business with their own in-house studios. So you have to package with those studios. Celebrity is king. Having a celebrities company attached, whether it's Chris Pratt's or Ellen DeGeneres, is absolutely critical in the packaging process. And those dynamics have never changed. But we've of the top 2 or 3 series that we've sold within the last year, Kingdom Business is a package that I put together that we sold in the room to NBC with Devon Franklin. Kirk Franklin has been a client for quite a long time, and then inspired clients John Sackmeyer and Carrie Linhart, who are the showrunners. NBC did not pick up any soaps. We moved it to BET. We're on kind of a fast track to do a rewrite and then have them pick it up on the air. But it's never been a more exciting time for this kind of content. I mean, as I'm talking to network executives and agents, everybody across the board is looking for aspirational, positive, redemptive. Even the networks that were focused on really dark fare are all changing their perspective. So, with this shaking that's going on, when the shutdown is lifted gradually, it's going to be showtime for everything that that has been our focus for all of these years. And it's an exciting time if you can back up from the immediate circumstantial darkness of it all.
Well, thank you. That's encouraging. Simon and I co-founded South Coast Alliance because we wanted to make it a place where voices like this panel could have a forum and talk about what it's like to work in Hollywood, both on the secular side and bringing inspirational, faith-based and family fare to the marketplace. And so from what I hear today, I'm very encouraged that going forward, we can make an impact. This week, we were supposed to have the South Coast Alliance Summit, but because of the regulations and the distancing, we postponed it. Hopefully we'll be having that in the fall. And we want to bring more of these conversations to the forefront and make people available to independent filmmakers so that we lift that tide and raise all boats. We can continue to try to make these small independent films, and there's certainly a place for them. But if we're going to impact the culture, we've got to take that to the next level, to the $15-20 million range, and develop films that are box office successes, so that investors do feel like, wow, I've got my money's worth and I've made an impact on the culture. Simon, do you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you've got to distinguish between the different types of filmmaking, right? So I did say if it's your first movie, it's a high risk proposition. So therefore you should try and keep your budget really low and manageable, right? Be kind of practical. All the basics of packaging a film require you to know your audience. So what are you making, first of all? There's the Alex Kendrick model, which is great, but he makes movies that are 2-hour sermons. He makes movies directly for the evangelical Christian audience. And that's his brand, that's his sweet spot, right? PureFlix is very similar to that. But many of us on this panel aspire to create content that's a little bit more in the lines of what I call sheep in wolves clothing. They're commercial. We use a very commercial director, a very commercial crew, have mainstream secular actors and actresses and that type of thing, because that's all about the packaging and the ending value. Right? I can say, particularly if you look at Redeeming Love's a sheep in wolves clothing. I believe it's going to have a major impact, and it's a beautiful, amazing looking movie.
And it's a Western to boot. I mean, it's not your general packaged faith film.
Yeah, it's kind of
it has a different look to it.
It's a contemporary Western, but again, it's like, just know which lane you're in and be honest about it. One of the things we struggled with when we launched Fox Faith years ago, and Ralph was with me back in those days, was you know, proving that there was a market there to serve for hopeful, inspirational content, and then trying to raise the bar, trying to make them better. And at the end of the day, the one thing everyone needs to realize is every single movie that's released is in one way or another a faith-based movie.
Right.
It reflects the values of a creator somewhere, either the screenwriter or the director, etc. Those things will come through, right? So it's like when you think about that, just go, okay, I'm going to do the movies. If you look at Alex Kendrick's model, he keeps the budgets pretty low and reasonable, but he's got a pretty good range. He's built his brand over 15 plus years, right, to get to where he's at. It's the same thing with the Irwins and so on. It is a long slog. It's a tough road. Either way you go, it's very rare that it happens like that.
Right. All right, so we're going to take some questions from the audience. I know that they've been posting as we've been talking. Aide, do you have some questions for us?
Yes, I do. I have Laura asking, on Salem Now, how long will a film be available?
Well, okay, that would depend on whether we run it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. There's nothing definite right now. So if that helps, you know, we have to decide first, is this something we would like to run? And then if so, what's the run on it? If it is an exclusive first run, then it would have probably a longer run opportunity, and it would be the sole movie promoted at that time.
Okay, very good. We have Quinn also asking, I would love to hear your suggestions on the best books, producing, casting, and filmmaking in general, so we can continue learning at this time. I know, Simon, you responded to that. You want to share with everyone else?
Sure. I mean, a really cool, fun read is The Big Picture by Ben Fritz, which he's kind of musing on what the future of studios looks like, what the future of movies are. And he did a brilliant job writing it. I don't agree with all of his conclusions, but I thought that the way he laid out the arguments and the issues was particularly provocative. And he basically drafted this. He's been a journalist in the media space for a long time, but he went through all of the Sony email hacks back in the day and, you know, kind of distilled those down into, here's the way people are thinking about how they're making movies, how the relationships matter, and kind of how people are looking at those things, right? And it's a very cool read. He's a great writer. And as I say, I don't agree with all of his conclusions, but it's a good provocative read.
On a daily basis, I like the Hollywood Reporter. It's cutting edge on what the industry is doing. You get a real sense of what the guilds and the studios want to do and the direction that they're taking. I find it very valuable on a daily basis to read that.
And there's also, you know, I just reached out my bookshelf. There's a bunch of books on the internet about how to produce movies, and, you know, it's exhausting the number of things that are out there. So
there's some great.
If you just go look on the internet, Amazon, whatever, or libraries, there's plenty of resources, plenty.
And there's some great TED Talks on how to create character arcs, how to structure the screenplay. Very basic stuff, but it's really, really good. I've enjoyed several of them by some premier writers and directors in the industry.
A lot of people mention, speaking of screenwriting, Jacqueline, a lot of people mention it in answer to that question, but Save the Cat is a read and a really good screenwriting book on structure.
That's
Save
good.
the Cat.
And there's a number of really good podcasts out there too that I listen to. There's Strictly Business. There's the Producer's Guide. It Happened in Hollywood, and Behind the Screen. Just bite-sized podcasts. They're usually about a half an hour long conversations with different producers and distributors and agents and stuff in the industry. It's also pretty good if you don't want to read the whole book.
There one last question.
Jacqueline, YouTube has a lot of them as well when you subscribe to them. A lot of different ones. Just do search, you know, writers and how to make a movie. There's tons of them while you're just sitting there doing whatever you're doing and just listening to them. Right. So there is a lot out there.
Aide, one last question.
We have Sherry asking, how will independent filmmakers make their budget back on their film with Salem?
Oh, okay. Well, the deal on a first-run movie is a 50-50 split, Sherry. So all the promotion would go into that, driving the people, and then whatever comes in, it's a real simple model. They split it 50-50 with the producer. Now, what I may not have mentioned also is that DVD sales are included. So we're bundling DVD sales along with the transactions for the streaming. So there are multiple ways then to make money on that and generate the revenue that you put into it. So that's basically the option right now.
That's awesome. Awesome. Any last words? All right. So
my only last thing, Jacqueline, would be for everyone to use this time to really reflect and turn it into a positive, right? I do think this is an amazing time of hope, and it's a challenge for us creators, us financiers, and us directors and producers to push forward. And as Ralph mentioned, continue to contribute to the national narrative. And I think it's never been more.
There are a few other questions on the Q&A tab there, they, and also some in the chat tab. Feel free to just parse those out to us. I'd like to be able to answer a lot of questions that we didn't get to. So
that's great. I was just going to say, we'll put all the Q&A and the links to this video on the South Coast Alliance website. So it's southcoastalliance.com. I urge all of our viewers to take a look at our website. Consider joining South Coast Alliance. As I said, if things get back to normal, we'll have some kind of an event in September. We'll also be doing a couple more webinars, one focused on women filmmakers. We have an incredible array of women producers, directors, and actors as part of our membership, and we'll be focusing on them with the next one. And then we'll be doing one on the minority experience as a filmmaker. So I hope you join us for those as well. And thank you so much. These guys are some of my best friends, and I dearly adore them. I thank you so much for participating today, guys. And you mean so much to me and to South Coast Alliance and to all the filmmakers out there. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and stay well, everyone. Stay in peace. And pray over our country. We need prayer. And with that, I want to thank everybody. Ida, do you want to sign us off?
Yes, I just want to make sure to thank our sponsors, Renaissance Communications. Thank you, Joe. And of course, Ralph Winter. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's event. Don't forget to also become a member. You have more opportunities to join South Coast Alliance and be a part of this great organization. There's more to come. We're very excited about it. You can join at www.southcoastalliance.com. Become a member there. There's several options for you to choose from, and you can also become a sponsor. So looking forward to seeing everyone. Don't forget about a women's webinar coming soon. Follow us on social media so that you can get all those details.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. God bless you.
Great.
Guys.
Bye.